When I was a child, I had a Melamed. When I was a kid, 10-year-old. I had a teacher whose name was Rabbi Fuchs. Yeah. Rabbi Fuchs was a Jew from an earlier generation. He really was a Jew from an earlier generation. In many, many ways. He was extraordinarily learned. I was 10 years old. I sat in his class. We were learning Bava Basra. It was the first year, Gemara. He would put his finger on the place. He turned 20 pages later and tell you what word was underneath. The pin. He put his finger on the page. He turned 50, 60 pages later and tell you what word was under his finger. He learned in Natvotsk, he learned in Lubavitch. In Natvotsk, there was a Yid by the name of Berel Kornitzer. Rav Berel Kornitzer, his last name was Garfinkel. But everybody's was named after the shtetl from which they came. Berel Kornitzer was a Tamim, was a big lamb, great mind. And Berel Kornitzer had a philosophy that everything you learn you have to memorize, by heart, everything. Rabbi Fuchs knew Tanya by heart, from the first page to the last page. In other words, he didn't know like till Pedek Chof or Pedek Lamed. He knew the whole Lekuti Amarim Self Shabein in him, the whole Lekuti Amarim Shari Yechet V'Amuna, the whole Gerzat Tshuva, the whole Gerzat Kodesh. He knew the Tanya by heart, cover to cover. And he was so humble, it was obscene. He was such a humble man. It was just, we never realized what kind of man we had as a teacher. To go to the elementary. He was a 6th grade Rebbe, he taught us. And you know what? I remember what I learned in his class. It was the year before was the Elementzias, but that was sort of just, but there's the first yeshiva Shemesechta that I learned was Hashutun, yeah? I'm sorry. Anyway, so I remember Yud Shvat. It was a rainy day. We went to the oil. It was the first time in my life I went to the oil. I was a 10-year-old. And he said to us, for me, Yud Shvat is a bittersweet day. Half of it's sad and half of it's happy. Because I was connected to the Pri Yiddike Rebbe. For you, it's entirely a happy day. This day is connected entirely to your Rebbe and to the Rebbe's becoming the Yossi of Chabad. So he tried to explain to us that we were 10, that for us it's a happy day. We were not that tuned in. Maybe some of my other friends were. I wasn't so into that at that time of my life. I was a little kid. And 10-year-olds are not necessarily that mature, and I was particularly immature. So I heard him. I remember the words. I'm very indebted to Rabbi Fuchs. I'm so indebted to him. And I'll tell you why. Anytime I met him for the next 40 years, as long as he was alive, I'd see him on the street, we were on the bus. Anytime I met him, he would stop and tell me a story. And I actually got seichel. I wrote some of them down. I have a few pages. He would, every time he saw me, and I'm imagining to all of us Talmidim, I remember he lived in Montgomery and Albany at the end of his life. He used to live in Eastern Parkway. And I'd walk by, he'd see him, so I knew. I'd stop, and he saw that I have time, and he would tell me a story. So generous. I learned in his class when I was 10, but this was Rabbi Fuchs. So all of us, including Rabbi Biston, who was born one day before, for us, this day, Yud Shvat, we mark the Nesias of the Rebbe. The Rebbe is becoming the ascendancy of the Rebbe to the Nesias of Chabad. What I'm about to say, I don't think is particularly important, but I want to share it anyway because people shared it with me. People shared it with me. And that is that when we talk about the story of the Rebbe becoming Rebbe, we don't fully appreciate the earnestness and the precariousness of that year. In other words, I knew people who were young then, but they knew the Chassidim whose responsibility it was to see to it that the Rebbe should agree to be Rebbe. So you had the Russians, the Tmimim, who were much older, like Rabbi Shmuel, like Rabbi Jacobson, like Rabbi Simpson, like Rabbi Kazanovsky. Somebody once told me, maybe you don't think they're Makusha, maybe, someone said to me once at a Farbrengen, he was trying to give me back because of my big mouth, Zem gemacht dem Rebbe mit Rebbe. Say whatever you want. They made the Rebbe Rebbe. Zem gemacht dem Rebbe mit Rebbe. He was saying, you don't understand the sensitivity of that year. People were really afraid. The Rebbe, when the Rebbe said no, he meant no. And the Rebbe said no, repeatedly. And the people who were here in New York, And then, of course, there were the younger ones. The younger ones were the Poilishe, Rabbi Mentlik, Rabbi Katz, Rabbi Weinberg, and people like that. And Shmuel Zalmanov is someplace in the middle of that. Rabbi Damagarari. It was a very hard year. I'm sure the Rebbe, I don't think there's a question. The Rebbe knew he has to be a Rebbe. But from the point of Chassidim, it was a very, very difficult year. They didn't know what was going to happen. And there was a metach, there was a tension, there was a fear. If Chas v'Sholem, the Rebbe doesn't take the position completely. And there's all kinds of stories. One of the more familiar stories, I heard this from Rabbi Fuchs, also heard it from Rabbi Handel, all of us, Shalom, that in Poland, there was a Temchat Mimim, there was a yeshiva in Atvatsk. And in the Beis HaMedrash, in the higher grades, there were two classes. The higher shiur for the really scholarly Bacharim was the Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Yudel Eber, who was a Gon Amiti. I mean, the stories you hear about him are extraordinary. He was running around all day raising money to pay the bills. He was the Menal Gashmi. He'd walk into the Beis HaMedrash 1 minute before his shiur, open up the Gemara, and deliver a class like he'd been learning all day and all night. He was so clear, he was so there. Rabbi Fuchs told me, every Zman, that means every 6 months, he would give one class at the beginning. I know you, right? I know you. I know you too. What's your name? Remind me. Duvi Blasberg. Phenomenal. Oh, the Berakoyen. Shlita. Okay, Shalom Aleichem. Okay, Shalom Aleichem. A party Yossi. Ich never bought. I'm old. Mit Tom nicht sagen, man vergesst, aber man vergesst fort. Aleichem Shalom Aleichem. We make Kiddush Lavana tonight, Baruch Hashem. So, famous Shalom Aleichem. So, Rabbi Fuchs told me that the higher shiur was a Yudel Eber, and the younger shiur was a Kotzke Chassid, not a Lubavitcher. His name was Rabbi David Rikir. He was a very Chassidish Yid, a very big Yiddish man, very God-fearing, very religious. Rabbi Fuchs was trying to explain to me how big a Yiddish man he was. He told me that Pesach, the yeshiva used to close the kitchen. In Atvatsk, they closed the kitchen. Most of the boys went home to their families. But the boys who stayed in yeshiva ate by Reb David. That was the degree of Yiddish man. He had the younger class. It was a big lampen, and there was a very big chassid. It was a Kotzke chassid. In 1937, I believe, the Kotzke Rebbe passed away. And he had no children, he was childless. So the community of Kotzke Chassidim decided they're going to make Reb David the new Rebbe. In a lack of a Rebbe with genes, they'll take a Rebbe who was a Chassidish Yid. So they came to this Reb David Rikir, and they said to him that Kotzke was a small Chassidus. This is the Einiklach when I meant that Kotzke was a small Chassidus, was a mom and pop Chassidus in Varsha Mistame. This is Atvatsk, this is Varsha. So they came to Reb David Rikir, he should be the Kotzke Rebbe. So he was very confused, he was very unsure. So he went into the Frierdiker Rebbe, to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Frierdiker Rebbe. And he told the Rebbe that the Kotzke Chassidim are asking him to be a Rebbe, he doesn't know what to do. And the Frierdiker Rebbe told him 3 things. He spoke to him in Yiddish, obviously. He said to him, as Chassidim beten is a simin as a doepes. If Chassidim are asking, that itself is a proof that there's a basis for it. Then he said, aber das arois zu rufen, darf sich überkehren die Kishkis in euch. To bring that out, you have to turn your intestines inside out. And then he actually gave him instructions. He told him what to do, a whole Seder Avodah, and then he should agree with him the best of Chassidic Kotzke. So when the Frierdiker Rebbe passed away, so he walked out of the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is Rabbi Fuchs. He walked out of the Frierdiker Rebbe, outside the door was standing the Balabas. There was one rich chassid in the whole Chassidus of Kotzke. He paid the bills, he paid for the cholent, he paid for the Farbrengen, he paid for the shtibel. And he was very, very involved in choosing the next Rebbe. So when he walked out, this man was standing outside the door. He repeated the whole Yechidus, all 3 parts. Chassidim are asking that to sign that there's something to talk about, but in order to bring it out in Kishkis, and then the instructions. Rabbi Fuchs told me that Toich Kedei Dibur, he forgot it. This other man, this layperson, the instructions, he forgot immediately. The minute he heard him, he unheard him. In other words, information that you don't need, you don't have. The Frierdiker Rebbe gave this Yida instructions, how to prepare yourself for an Inyan Pdimi. He repeated it to somebody else. As soon as he heard it, he forgot it. But the first two parts he remembered and he repeated it. So when the previous Rebbe passes away, Rabbi Handel told me himself, he went into the Rebbe, the hard Rebbe. And he said to the Rebbe, I have a proof that the Rebbe is supposed to be Rebbe, but he told him only the first part, that they were learning in Yeshiva in Paltiel. And the Chassidim came to Rabbi David, there should be a Rebbe. And the Friedrich Rebbe said, that Chassidim betn is a similar stuff. If Chassidim are asking, that's a proof that there's something to talk about. And he stops. So the Rebbe looks at Rabbi Handel and says to him, maybe the Rebbe said something else in addition. After the Rebbe, to them gesagt, no, like. So this is the truth, that year, you hear the stories, it was a hard year. Again, I don't think there's a question that Rebbe would have been Rebbe. But the way they felt at the time, I heard from reliable sources that after the Friedrich Rebbe passed away in the beginning, people came to the Rebbe and asked him to be a Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, if you don't leave me alone, I'll run away from New York and you'll never find me. I heard it the name of Rabbi Saul Jacobson. I miss a word. You know what that means? The Rebbe didn't play games. And the Rebbe kept on saying no. He kept on saying no. And everybody understood, the Rebbe said the Friedrich Rebbe is still alive, the Friedrich Rebbe is still the Rebbe. And they were really concerned. They really were worried, what's going to be? And the Rebbe accepted. The way I understand it, the way I feel. There's a Maisa. It's an interesting story, which is printed in the Yemei Bereshis, that there was a Jew in New York who was very close to the Rebbe before he was Rebbe. His name was Harav Yitzchak Hutner, Rabbi Hutner. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva Chaim Berlin. He was a Litvish Shadid, he was a Litvak, he was a very interesting man. And he had a chavrus with the Rebbe every Friday night. They learned Chassidus together. And I heard from a Misnagid, I heard from one of his students, that when the previous Rebbe passed away, he would come every Friday night to the house and learn with the Rebbe. He was in the Rebbe's house the night before the Friedrich Rebbe passed. I'm going to get back to that in a second. He continued coming. For many months after the previous Rebbe passed away, he continued coming. And then one Friday night he didn't show up. And the Rebbe sent a message, what happened to the Chavrusa? So he sent back a message. I heard it from a Chaim Berliner. Mit Ramash weisich wie zu lernen. Mit Neside Reinu weisich nicht wie zu lernen. With the Ramash I can learn. The Rebbe used to be called Ramash. But with the Nasi of their generation, I don't know how to learn. He and the Rebbe used to fight like cats and dogs. Because the Rebbe would tell him that the previous Rebbe is a Nasi Ador. And he was a Litvak, and he would go out of his mind. They would argue. I know from many people, he couldn't take it. Who does he think he is? Who decided, So, but the Rebbe and him talked it through. They would argue. He would say his Pete, and they didn't just scream and shout, they learned. So he would continue the Chavrusa. I heard this from a Chaim Berliner, not from a Lubavitcher. And at some point he decided he can't go anymore. And when the Rebbe asked what happened to the Chavrusa, he said, I can learn with the Ramash, with the son-in-law of the Friedrich Rebbe I can learn. But with Neside, he used the words that he always used to argue against. Mit Neside Reinu, with the Nasi, with the leader of the generation, I don't know how to learn. That's how the Chavrusa ended. So here's the story. Rabbi Groner, who later lived in Melbourne, Australia, met Rabbi Hutner in the summer 1950. And he says to Rabbi Groner, knew what's going on in Lubavitch. So Rabbi Groner says, Allah will the Ramash. Everybody wants the Rebbe. That was called the Ramash. Just like the Rashag was the older brother-in-law. Rashag is his first name, Rebbe Shmaryo Gerari. So the Rebbe was Ramash. The Rebbe's first name, Schneerson. That's what the Rebbe was called, Ramash. So Rabbi Groner said to Harav Hutner, all the Chassidim want the Ramash, and the Ramash doesn't want, and we're all very worried about it. So Rabbi Hutner said to him, don't worry. He's going to take the job. He's going to take the job. It's a matter of time. And they said to him, how do you know? How do you know? The Rebbe is a very serious man. He doesn't say things just to be dramatic. The Rebbe is saying no. The Rebbe is saying no. He said, I'll tell you how I know. The Friday night, Shvat, Friday night before the Rebbe passed, we were learning in a regular chavrusa. And suddenly the Rebbe interrupts. And the Rebbe says to me that there was once a grandson of the Tzemach Tzedek who was meant to be a Rebbe. And he Shumef didn't want. And the Chassidim pressed him, and pressed him, and pressed him, and he became a Rebbe. The Rebbe told us him the night before the Rebbe passed. He says, believe me, he's going to take the job. He's going to take the. But if you were alive at that time, they were worried. They were very concerned. That's what I understand. And my hergish is, my feeling is, and I've heard this from people who are much older and wiser than myself, that in Das Tachten, the way you look at it from a worldly point of view, Chassidim changed the Rebbe's mind. Chassidim changed the Rebbe's mind. Again, I'm sure there's a Das Elyon. But the Rebbe, when he said no, he meant no. And the Chassidim said yeah, and the Rebbe said yeah. I know a story, which I'm not going to say any names. But there was another famous Chassidus, where there was a conflict about who should be a Rebbe. And one of the candidates came to our Rebbe in 53, probably the very beginning. And he wanted that the Rebbe should lobby for him. The Rebbe should take his side in the dispute. And the Rebbe said to him, I heard this in the name of Moshe Groner, from his nephew. The question of Nesias belonging to Ziknei Chasidei, I'm not going to say which Chassidus it was. The decision who's to be Rebbe is going to be made by the elder Chassidim of that group. In other words, I'm not going to get involved. And in a Das Tachten way, again, this is what I've heard from people. The Chassidim wanted the Rebbe to be Rebbe. And the Chassidim showed a dedication, they showed an earnestness, and the Rebbe accepted the Nesias. Recently, in the base Chabad magazine, maybe Pesach time, they did an expose on 6 personalities who used to come to the Farbrengen. It's a very beautiful shtickle. They had the Skalene Rebbe in there, a few nice people. But one of the personalities that they presented was a Jew by the name of Rabbi Ephraim Eliezer HaKoyen Yossi from Philadelphia. Rabbi Yossi was much older than the Rebbe. He fell in love with the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe came in 1930 to Philadelphia. And I heard from people who knew that there was a Rav over there who really was an Orthodox Rav who really made life very difficult to the previous Rebbe. And Rabbi Yossi, who was not a Lubavitcher, he was a Benoncha Kadosh, he was a Rebbe himself from some Gezer. He's the grandson of the Baal Shem Tov. Stood up for the Frierdiker Rebbe. He developed an incredibly personal relationship with the previous Rebbe and with the Rebbe. The letters that he wrote when the previous Rebbe passed away are gold. As soon as the previous Rebbe passes away, he starts writing to Anash. I don't know what's going on with you. People got to wake up. We have a Rebbe and you got to make it happen. He's saying no, but you have to say yes. And for sure he's going to do it. He talks about our Rebbe as soon as the previous Rebbe passes with such a certainty that, first of all, this is Rebbe. And second of all, we have to make it happen, you know. This Rabbi, so one of the stories that they write there is, when the Rebbe became Rebbe, the Farbrengen was in the shul upstairs. So there was actually 3 rooms. But it's now the Merkez was open, the doors were open, the shul, and then the window, they took away the bookcases, so people, it was packed. And people were outside on the street, many people were outside in the street. Remember, it's the middle of the winter. Rabbi Yossi came early, got himself a good spot. A little while before the Farbrengen, he gets a message that the Rebbe wants to see him in his room. Now you got to go, right? This is a very important time to show up, but he's thinking, there goes my place. So he left his spot and he went into the Rebbe. The Rebbe probably talked about something very important. He told the Rebbe, you know, I lost my spot. So the Rebbe says to him, he was much older, maybe in 50s older than the Rebbe. You'll grab a hold of my girdle and you'll go in with me. With the girdle, with the belt. And that's what happened. And he lived his whole life with that. He would always talk about it. The Rebbe said, grab a hold of my girdle and wherever I go, you'll go. Rabbi Yossi. I just want to finish with one simple thought. I heard from people who are that Farbrengen. Farbrengen finished about 12:30. It started around 9:20. The Rebbe came in late. It was called for 8:30. The Rebbe never came late. That night the Rebbe came in almost an hour late, 9:20. It was over about 12:30. There's a recording of much of the Farbrengen. I heard from people who were there that when the Rebbe walked out of the Farbrengen, men in their 60s and 70s and 80s were jumping up and down like school children. The joy that the Rebbe took it, and it was for real. It was the simcha. The simcha by Chassidim was palpable. There was such a joy, such a relief that the Rebbe was makabel the Nesias. And the other story that goes with it is the Rebbe said the first Maimer. Rabbi Yael Khan was a week shy of his 21st birthday. He wasn't even 21. Between Wednesday night and Shabbos, he repeated the Maimer. People would come in. And they didn't know there was a tape. The tape was discovered 30 years later. And Rabbi was the tape recorder. He'd give it back. Between Wednesday night and Shabbos, he must have repeated the Maimer 10 times. People kept coming in, Rabbi would chazer. So when the Rebbe came to Shul Friday night, and the Rebbe got wind of what was going on, that they were reviewing the Maimer, so the Rebbe said, "Favos the good Sachen sagt mir nicht." Why doesn't anybody tell me the good news? The point of this little talk is that there was an incredible simcha, there was an incredible joy by Chassidim. When the Rebbe was makabel the Nesiyas, there was a Yid, he was the Rebbe's secretary. His name was Moshe Leibachstein. He was the only secretary who was a secretary by the Frierdiker Rebbe, and when the priest passed away, the Rebbe put him on his own staff. And I heard from people that he was really the senior. Rabbi Chadakov was the head of the secretariat, but the Rabbi Shalei was the senior member, and he set the tone. He had been a secretary by the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he sort of had a sense of how you have to behave, and he set the tone for the maskirs. He was a very big chassid, and he wrote a letter to his friends in Israel about our young Rebbe. The Rebbe wasn't so young; he was almost 49, almost 50. He writes, "They ziehen sich zu ihm als wie fliegen." They're attracted to him like flies. And he's trying to explain, you see, if you came from Russia, and you were a Tomim, and you lived in the holy times, when the world was, so of course, so that's what you lived, The American-born boys, okay, they learned in yeshiva, but there was America, America's another world. And he writes how the kids, the teenagers, and the young adults were drawn to the Rebbe. The Rebbe didn't entertain. The Rebbe wasn't funny. The Rebbe wasn't interesting. The Rebbe was very earnest. But they were drawn to him. They were drawn. The kids were drawn to the Rebbe, and what the Rebbe was, and what the Rebbe inspired. And there was an incredible optimism, incredible joy around the Rebbe's Kabbalas and Nesiyas. And the point for us is that this is the time for us to experience that kind of joy. We're all Chassidim. Some of us are older, some of us are younger. Some of us are committed, some of us are still trying to figure out exactly what it means to be a Chassid. But in the end, being a Chassid is not a burden. Being a Chassid is not a hardship. Being a Chassid is a incredible schus, and it makes our lives so positive and so meaningful and so rich and so holy and so good. And we're fortunate. We really are fortunate. We're very, very fortunate that we're in these days. We're very fortunate we're connected to the Rebbe and that we're close to the Rebbe. We should appreciate that, and we should live accordingly. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'bracha, l'chaim, l'chaim, l'bracha. I want to thank everybody for coming out on Shabbos. I was thinking, if I bring all day, I guess not. There's a little more left in the tank. Can I bring noch a bissel? Okay, l'chaim everybody. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'bracha, l'chaim, shalom aleichem, l'chaim. Let me talk in Tzom L'chanafshi. Tzom L'chana. I'll listen. Come on.